Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Baytul Gudi. This is the first show of its kind. I've got some respected brothers who joined us today. Brother Mazin, hopefully I've said that right, and Brother Thierry. Just to give you a little background of today's show. Today's show we'll be discussing atheism and conjuncture and whether or not following atheism is something healthy in society. Brother Mazin belongs to I hope he doesn't take this offensively, but he belongs to the Salafi background. I've had discussions with him before in the past. He's a good brother, mashallah, he's very knowledgeable. I've known him for a little while now. You know, we've always kept, we've always had conversations about a variety of issues, and we've always kept that mutual respect for one another, regardless of our ideological differences. So today's topic about atheism, for those who are familiar to this term, ultimately atheism means those who deny the existence of God. Atheism has existed throughout history, but it really evolved in the 18th century with various so-called thinkers coming forward and claiming that there is no world of existence outside matter. This ideology became prevalent over the 18th century. Atheism influenced science and philosophy. And I believe it was until the late 1800s, with the help of Charles Darwin, who introduced the theory of evolution, they were now able to justify their beliefs in proving that there was no creator when it comes to the existence of millions of species who all happen to come about by chance. So without further ado, I'm going to come to our guest now. Brother Mazin, if you want to come on, inshallah, and then I will be passing on to Brother Thierry.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just to clarify, I'm not a Salafi actually, although I do follow, of course, a Salaf Salih, but I'm not actually what you categorize as Salafi, because modern day Salafis are those who follow, generally speaking, the views of generally the scholars of the followers of Saudi and so on and so forth. But Jazakallah khair for having me on the show today.
Mentioning it at the start of the show as well, I said hopefully you won't get a backlash from coming on our channel. I mean, we've always the purpose of our channel is to really reach out to all communities regardless of our difference of opinion. I think it's important, especially as Muslims, to come together, at least come to terms with things that we can all agree upon, and as a society, putting aside our debates, etc., we are facing serious issues which not just affect us, but it also affects the future generations of Muslims living in the West, or living wherever it is in the world. So, Brother Mazin, if you want to come online, inshallah, and we can get going, and we can start today's discussion, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. So, so basically, I mean, the issue of atheism today is there's so many different angles to tackle the issue, and there's some complaints even that some people have even about the whole way that it's approached. Sometimes people say that it's approached in too complicated an approach, too much philosophical jargon, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, is that as even you and I had a bit of a discussion earlier, which is the issue of atheism in terms of belief in the existence of a creator or not, is something that can be really simplified quite a bit, but it has a long history, which obviously we're going to go through, I guess, throughout the discussion. And I find that in modern day, one of the biggest issues that we have with why so many people have become so inclined towards atheism, and why they almost seem to think as if atheism is or it's more intellectual than believing in God. They almost treat belief in a creator as if it's naive or juvenile. And so when you look at the sources of this, and I find that for me, for example, I spend a lot of time online. I spend a lot of time reading discussions and conversations. Of course, you see on Reddit, you see on our atheism and our ex-Muslims and our Islam and all these different subreddits. You find that they have these lots of times there's a condescension with people who have belief. And so I think that it has to do with a number of things. I think one of the main core things that happens today is anti-Christianity. So Christianity is a very irrational religion. It's a religion that's like literally it's founded on irrationality. It tells you essentially don't think about it. You just have blind faith and just believe in it, and you'll know that's true. I remember I owned a computer store in a city called Aylmer, and so it's a city it's Mennonite Christians, almost 100% Mennonite Christians, and so they used to regularly come in. Evangelicals used to come in trying to save my soul, and they basically would try to they would try all sorts of angles, and I had honestly over 100 people come in the span, maybe a couple hundred people actually over the span of being there, and they would come in regularly, constantly trying to get me to convert. And one of the more interesting conversations that I had was with this one Christian who, my wife was there at the time, and I was discussing with him. She had converted to Islam, obviously, because she had studied the Bible and realized that it could not be from God. And so he said, "That was your first mistake." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You studied the Bible." Right. And so like she went to college to go study the Bible. She went to a Bible college in Aylmer, as far as I know. And so that's the thing, is that you have people who, so Christianity almost tells you don't think, so you find, and even some Muslims actually have been, like when I was younger, a member of my family once told me, I asked, how do we know God exists? And she said, don't ever ask that question. It's haram to ask this kind of question. And the thing is, this is completely untrue. The Qur'an specifically tells us you're not allowed to believe in anything unless you've proven it 100%. Right? Right? So your doubt or any sort of conjecture or any sort of belief that's not 100% certain has no place. So because of this, a lot of people feel as if belief in any religion, just because some religions are irrational, they think that all religions must be the same. That's one of the major factors today why people have become so they feel almost like it's an insult to their intelligence to believe that a creator exists, despite the fact that really, when you look at it very simply, there's nothing irrational about saying the universe, there's something designed this. Even if you say, okay, there's no proof to it, or whatever argument they want to put forth, just looking at things, you can say it's not irrational to say that this was created by a creator. And then there's the second point, which is the issue of I really firmly believe, because I've experienced this myself, and I know a lot of people who were raised in Canada and the West, who, when they started getting older and they started realizing Santa Claus isn't real and the Tooth Fairy isn't real, I really, truly believed that Santa Claus was actually, because we had a chimney, we had a fireplace and everything, we had the whole setup. And we used, and my family, unfortunately, we used to celebrate Christmas. So we used to have a Christmas tree and the presents and everything. And so I used to firmly believe that Santa Claus came through, and I used to find it a little bit scary that he's coming through the chimney. And then I used to put my teeth under the pillow, and I used to be so excited about the money that the Tooth Fairy actually brought me. It wasn't anyone else. And the Easter Bunny, I used to be really confused about the Easter Bunny, because we're going around looking for the eggs. But the thing is, where is this bunny, right? So there was all these things that I went through. But the thing is, when I got older and I realized that all of it was a lie, what happened to me, and this doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a lot of people, that I felt really, really stupid. And I was only in my early teens when this happened. So it was not like I was an adult or anything. But even as a child, I remember I just stopped and I felt really stupid. Like, how could I have been played for such a fool? And same thing with my wife, same thing with a lot of people that I know. Some people I know got really angry actually as a child. They felt very resentful. So the thing is, when a person feels like this, and so I ended up hating all religions until I was 20 years old. Right? Even Islam, I hated all. I stayed away from anybody who I knew who was religious. I wouldn't talk to them. I wouldn't become their friend. And so that's one thing. Of course, we can go into more detail as we discuss more. But I think these are the two primary components. One is the other irrational religions, and people think that all religions must be the same, and therefore they just reject the religions and the existence of God. And then you have the issue of children today being raised to look at religion, at belief, as if it means so little. You can believe in anything, right? And it doesn't really matter. And it's just, when you grow up, who cares? Just throw your beliefs away. Whereas Islam establishes this foundation that what you believe in, is the most serious thing in the entirety of a human being's life.
Thank you for that. Brother Thierry, do you want to add anything to that, or is there anything to add to this?
Yeah, sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Sorry that my ugly face is not on the camera right now, but inshallah it will be in a few minutes. Well, I also have two ways of approaching this. Actually, as the brother said, there are a lot of ways of approaching this. Also very specific Shia ways, which we'll leave out of this discussion because that will take a lot of time. But the thing that I wanted to, maybe a nice anecdote. I was driving a car today and listening to a podcast, a little about technology, and there was a woman who's also in high tech, and she said that she made a dating app. Might be a strange approach to this, but I'll come to my point later. She made a dating app from the perspective of women, because she says most dating apps are made by men. Okay. In any case, she said something very interesting. Sometimes she said, I want to be GPS tracked. I want my Uber, I want my GPS tracking. The last thing I will do is get into a taxi. I want to people to know where I am. I want to know what I am doing. I want this big sister watching over me from technology. And here is something very interesting, she said, and this is where we come to the first perspective I am looking at atheism. She sees this big brother perspective from this big sister's perspective, as she calls it, through technology. And one of the things that atheists will always keep saying is, why all these exoteric rules? Why do we need community? Why can't I just live as an individual? Religion is redundant. Religion is a social construct, which was maybe a necessity before, but today we have technology and the this and the that. And what she didn't realize, of course, is she said women want safety, want security, want this sense of safety and security. And she gets it through technology. While when you ask the same people, what do you think of certain things you find in Sharia, like let's just say something very controversial, women should ask permission before going out. Without going further into that, I mean, what's the difference with the technology? The difference is the technology is depersonalized. But people do not realize that there is a mechanization of our lives, that there's technology taking over, and not just technology, the other part, government. Government, the welfare state, is taking over a lot of these social functions, which we find in religion. But in religion, these have a reason to exist. There is a reason behind them. While welfare states, technology, they still cannot come to any philosophical or existential answer to why they exist, except it just works, and it works better than the alternative. So this is one reason I think that we are often forgetting why atheism is there. The other reason being, also through this mechanization and everything, people have actually lost, so it's kind of interconnected, people have lost any motivation and reason to question their own existence. They have forgotten to just ask these questions. And when you don't ask questions, why would you need the answer? So these two parts I find very crucial and fundamental when we approach atheism. I'm hoping I'm not being too intellectual by pointing this out.
No. You can carry on by all means. If you've got anything else to add, please go ahead.
So I'll let brother continue and maybe pick in on him.
That's fine, no problem. Brother Maz, did you want to add into that? It's interesting that Brother Thierry pointed about the system of morality as well to some extent, and who defines morality, and whether or not man should be left to decide that. Because at the end of the day, man is he's influenced by society. He's influenced by his heritage, his background, his his political condition, emotions, psychology, and instincts, and so forth. So if man can make the question is whether or not man can make a reliable system of law when we have people out there who are murdering, robbing, cheating, and in general they're not following religious laws but their own opinions and desires. And I think this is one of the reasons why, as a society, atheism, it's not healthy for society. It's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for our women, it's not healthy for our children. If we look at history from a historical perspective, we even find that, any communism, for example, when it comes to communism, we learn that, society was extremely oppressed, historically speaking, I don't want to mention any countries at this point, but you notice that, when it comes to communism, they really want to push religion, or they want to push God out of the equation in order to impose, their own laws, man-made laws, and so forth. Brother, do you want to come on and perhaps add anything to that, or do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, so I guess the interesting thing is that often we don't separate between the two topics of the existence of a creator and whether or not the creator sent a message, and if so, which message that is. We tend to think that if we've proven that the creator exists, automatically that proves that we need a message. And no, these are actually two relatively exclusive things, although many of the scholars of the past have mentioned that the proof of Islam is the Qur'an, not some rational proof. Whereas others, and it goes back to ilm al-kalam and a lot of discussions that went back and forth about, whether or not the mind is sufficient to be able to prove the existence of a creator. Or you require a message from the creator to identify things. And it's interesting because actually recently, because I'm studying Sharia, and in the class, the sheikh is explaining basically that it's the Mu'tazila view of 1, 2, or 3. And if you look at it, you find that you can sift through it a little better in that the mind is capable of reaching belief in the existence of a creator on its own, but it's unlikely. If there's widespread atheism and there's, like, for example, polytheism in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it's very rare for a person to reach monotheism when everyone else is doing something else. Not because the mind can't reach it, but just in the nature of thing. Because there's ayah, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. So we don't punish until we send the messenger. So the question is, well, so then does Allah not punish atheism? And the issue is that it might be that Allah is more forgiving to people who don't realize, if you're in an environment where there's no opportunity, nobody's even discussing monotheism in the first place, or the existence of a creator. Today's world, of course, is completely different, because you have essentially the discourse is so wide open. It's very, very unlikely that there's anybody except for maybe some tribes, even the tribes actually, who are isolated from the whole world. They've come across, with very few exceptions, of course. But the bottom line is that it's very important to differentiate between belief in the existence of a creator and the message from that creator. So belief in the existence of a creator is founded simply by asking the question: is it possible for the universe to exist completely independent of anything? Okay, and that's why even in English it's actually quite limited. In Arabic, it's much more like, it's obviously a much more expansive language, and because there's ezeli and ebedi. Right, so ezeli means existed eternally backwards in time, and ebedi means exists eternally forwards in time. And so in English, you just say eternal. So which direction in time are you going? And so that's the thing, is Islam says is that. So the question that we're asking is ezeli. Is it possible for the universe to exist in al-azal, which is to always have existed? It's one of the reasons why the Big Bang theory exists, is because anybody who thinks about it clearly and carefully will realize that obviously it's impossible for the universe to exist eternally. It has to have a starting point. But once that's established, then the next question comes to the morality, which is what you asked. The question about morality is that, and by the way, so many people who debate the existence of God, they do discuss it from this angle, saying that the fact that.
Sorry, bro, I didn't want to interrupt you, but just a quick point. I remember not so long ago as well, I was reading an article about how I believe it was even in the late 19th century, some individuals went as far as rejecting the concept of Big Bang, because they believed still that the world was, the universe was something eternal. So, even with the modern science that we have now, we come to know that science is actually proving the existence of God, and atheism is actually on the decline.
Exactly. There's even a quote, although I don't have it here, but it's a very interesting quote where a number of scientists said a similar thing. They said that at the beginning of the study of science, you'll find atheism. You will find that you will end up believing in atheism. But as you go deeper and deeper to the very outreaches of science, you'll find God waiting for you there, right? And the thing is that it's actually true. Most people that I've discussed with who become atheists because they've studied a little bit of science and they feel so smart, and they have a shirt that says science with an exclamation mark and two guys holding their arms up with beakers in their hands. The thing is that you know, it's a very juvenile kind of approach to the topic. But when you study the reality of the human design and the just, you know, even some simpler things, to be honest, it doesn't even have to be that complicated. You look at the fact that there's water machines that float over our heads, and had they not existed, everything would be dead. That, like, just that one machine that exists, this floating machine that and by the way, I don't know if you know, the one cloud, a rain cloud, weighs as much as, I think it was 100 tanks. I forget, I did a calculation some time ago. So 100 war tanks, and it's just one single rain cloud. This is not talking about all the clouds in the sky. And somehow they just float and they drop water, and it's not just water that comes down in these piercing shards. It parachutes, and it comes down softly and gently. And also there's actually a study I read some time ago. Rainwater is the only type of water that naturally exists that's able to bring back dead land. So the land that has absolutely no nutrients whatsoever. No other water that exists in the world is able to bring that type of land. You know, that land you see in Africa and certain parts of the world, where it's all cracked and it has no possibility of life. Rain, just the rain dropping on it, will bring vegetation back through it. And Allah mentions in the Qur'an repeatedly. But yeah, so in terms of morality, it's a bit of a different topic. I'm not sure if I fully agree with approaching the proof of the existence of a creator by proving the need for humans to.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because I just wanted to bring up. I just wanted to do a quick share, and that was that. See, the thing is, you know, when it comes to religion, the whole purpose, or one of the main purposes of religion, is the fact that, you know, when it comes to laws, you know, we have these laws which have been set to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator. Therefore, you know, when it comes to heaven and hell, you can consider this as some type of motivator, and it's in accordance with man's nature. So religious people don't only they don't only do good deeds to paradise to avoid. You know, religious people don't just do good deeds to avoid heaven and hell. They do this because they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy to be worshipped. I just wanted to share this quick article, actually, very quickly on the screen, just so you can have a look at this. It's quite interesting. I found this to be pretty fascinating. And it was about, give me a second, you should be able to see my screen. Just give me a second. It was an article written in the Guardian newspaper, and it said, sorry, let me just close this. Second. Apologize, my computer is slow today. And it said atheists tend to be sorry, let me just close down. It said atheists tend to be seen as immoral even by other atheists studied. And it's quite a fascinating article. So it's available through The Guardian, and it was some extremely interesting quotes about how, generally speaking, atheists are seen to be more immoral than religious people. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or but yeah, it's quite interesting finding.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially the bottom line is that one of the reasons why people get so confused about whether or not morality can exist outside of religion is because they think that just because we can assess the chemical composition of humans and the neural pathways of the mind and the composition of the atom and whatever, the table of elements and physics and chemistry and science and bio, all these different areas of life, because there's certain things that are empirical sciences that we can sense with the five senses, that means we automatically can know what's the best way of solving mankind's problems. And this is the issue, is that when you look at, for example, just as the simplest example, a relationship between a male and a female. Let's say marriage never existed. The concept of marriage, of like even having the marriage ceremony where you walk up the aisle, or you have the two witnesses and the mahar, or any type of marriage, it doesn't exist whatsoever. And let's say nobody's, if you're to kind of go in some, like, hypothetical fantasy world where no one's ever had a relationship ever, and so the very first relationship is forming between a male and a female. If you were to start from that point and consider, let's say you're able to record every single possible outcome of every single type of relationship that can occur between a male and a female, whether it's a one-night stand or a a relationship for a few weeks, or a relationship of celibacy, for example, for 5 years, 10 years, getting to know each other, or whatever else. I mean, multiple wives, multiple husbands. If you can literally break it down to hundreds of thousands of possibilities. And the problem is that even if you were to record literally every single possible way that, and not just every single way that the relationship can be organized, but every single possible outcome in all of existence, and record it in the most fantastic database you've ever seen, you still wouldn't be able to figure out which one is best, right? And that's the problem, is when it comes to human interactions, only Allah Azza wa Jalla knows which one comes always with the best possible outcome. So that's the problem. When it comes to morality, that's the problem with morality. Morality is something that is beyond the human capability of ever figuring out. Because if you want to establish foundations such as freedom, well, then suddenly everything opens up. It opens up the door to, again, whether it's relationships with preteens or with animals, whether it comes down to relationship with one's sister or one's mother and these sorts of things. So that's the problem, is that when you suddenly have this, so now you have to restrict it. Same thing for even morality in terms of having freedom in society. Where's the limit? They say, well, your freedom ends where the other person's freedom starts. Well, okay, well, what kind of harm are we talking about here? Are we talking about emotional harm? Then, if somebody is rich and he's hurting my feelings because he has more money than me, does that give me the right to, okay, well, no, you can't. And that's the problem, is suddenly it becomes it's such a gray area. The human mind is just simply incapable. So the bottom line is that we as human beings, we need guidance from the designer of the universe and the designer of the human psychology and the instincts and all the chemicals that are running through us, because we don't even understand what's going on inside of us. But that doesn't mean that the creator sent us a message, by the way, right? So it could be that he could send us a message, but that's why we're required to look for a message. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he has. Of course, we do know he has, obviously, because of Islam.
Well, there I'd like to begin actually. Yeah. The whole thing actually mentioned something very interesting, that it's a very gray area. And exactly there we find a big problem with our modern or postmodern, I should say, time, that we have a certain ideology which has replaced religion, which you can also call a religion. It's like a human rights religion. And it's actually a very exoteric religion, and it's telling you how to behave, how to respond to people. It's giving you it's giving you kind of a manual, a very loaded manual, which keeps getting heavier now that we can't even say to a person his gender. But that aside, but for all these things that this human rights religion is imposing on us, it does not have any concrete proof or any doctrinal references even proportional to its proper demands. It demands a lot of us, but it doesn't give any proof on why this ought to be, or why this is the correct way, or why human rights is the superior way. And actually, if you look at the history of human rights, there's something very interesting. It doesn't exist. They tried in 1947 by putting together all the world's intellectuals almost that remained after World War II to get to a definition of human rights. They sat together for something like 3 months, and they couldn't come up with it. So then they just had to quickly make something up to come to the eventual Declaration of Human Rights, because they could not. And you asked me for some quotes. I do have some actually on this part, which are very revealing. For example, if the Western world would like to convince the whole planet of the good and superior nature of human rights, the way it has designed these, then we have to acknowledge its anthropological and theological presuppositions. If, on the other hand, it wants to avoid pointing out these presuppositions, which is what it is doing, because nobody can define human rights, well, then it must acknowledge that its formulation, which is it's giving to human rights, comes from its own tradition and does not have any universal value, except to the extent that it's like a common moral sentiment shared by all people of goodwill. This comes from François Vlaho in a French book about Descartes. See, another philosopher. Sorry, when I start quoting it, it goes like this usually. But you see here, human rights is the ideology which is kind of replacing religion, which of course is the only one that comes together with atheism, the human rights ideology. There's a lot of exotericism in it, a lot of laws, a lot of Sharia, we can say, but it does not give us any reason to believe in its universal validity. None.
Oh, just had to unmute myself there. Thank you for that, bro. It's a very interesting point you made there. I mean, Brother Martin, what do you see the future as when it comes to the issue of atheism? Do you think more and more people are slowly accepting God, or do you think that still there's the atheist factory are really, they're really indoctrinating people even now in the method of, when it comes to science, when it comes to the issue of science, you have various schools of science, but at the same time, you do have some of these atheists who are at the forefront of some of these scientists, scientific organizations, and then later these same scientists influence, our studies for our children. Yet, if we go back into the past, we find that some of the biggest scientists, were religious people. Do you see a decline in atheism at the moment, or not?
No, I don't think that's going to. The atheism will not decline. If anything, it'll probably increase until probably a khilaf is reestablished, until Muslims become an authority in this world. I don't think anybody has any possible chance of becoming an authority that is respected as an authority that believes in a creator other than the Muslims. We're the only ones who actually have an opportunity. Christianity, they'll plunge the world into a dark age. Judaism, they'll just do what they're doing in Palestine. Just killing people and just becoming racist and self-centered. The Muslims are the only ones that have this possibility because we have the guidance of Allah Azza wa Jal, a religion that has been unchanged, and we have really, really upright people. Just as a quick side point, when I was traveling through the Muslim world, and I've written a number of posts about this, which is as I went through
there for like 30 seconds, bro. So.
Oh, subhanAllah. So at which point did it get cut off? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I don't think I missed anything.
Oh, I think he.
Oh,
so I think you're.
Give a second. I think it's your connection, perhaps.
No, so I think it's you actually, not us, because we can hear each other just fine.
Yeah.
So maybe me and Theory
can
talk to
having
each
slight
other.
technical difficulties. Sorry, bro. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I think you're having slight bit of technical difficulties. We didn't get any of that, so you know.
So just to be clear, I think it was you who had the connection issue because we could hear each other. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, that's fine. As long as Material, did you hear the brother? Or?
Yeah, I could hear everything.
Okay, fine. It's probably my connection then. I think I'm
getting an epileptic seizure of this going back and forth, but that's something else.
Okay, that's fine.
So basically what I found is as I went through the Muslim world, and I went through some really poor areas throughout the Muslim world, I found that the uprightness of Muslims in some of the poorest areas was something very rare. I would go through certain parts of, whether it's Jordan or whether it's any other part of really poor areas in the Muslim world, and you find that there's the people are not there to just kill and steal. Like if you go to the poor areas in America or the poor areas in many parts of Europe, it's really frightening to walk through those areas. You have to carry a weapon with you or something to defend yourself because you're going to get mugged, especially in certain parts of South America. Are you still? Can you hear everything? Are you still having connection issues?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, I'm seeing a bit of a lag with you.
I always have connection issues. So
yeah,
it's one of those things, unfortunately. I think I need to invest in a higher internet speed connection, even though I do have technically 100 megabytes. For some strange reason, I think I've got so many devices attached to it, it just slows it down.
Well, yeah, keep in mind that your 100 megabits will be your download, but your upload might be like 2 or 3. So
is MI5 paying you enough money?
Yeah, the MI5 are not paying me enough money.
Yeah. Because recently mine was I had a 650 megabit download, but my upload was only about 7. Anyways, we're going off topic. I upgraded to 50 now, but I have to upgrade to something higher now because even then.
Now you're showing up.
Yeah. So basically, the thing is that the thing is one thing we have to just acknowledge, we have so many of these discussions and debates and so on. And the thing is, we have to acknowledge the vast majority of people, even the people who end up agreeing with one side or the other, even the vast majority of people who are just watching the show, they don't actually have their own opinion. They're just following whichever looks the strongest. So most people don't really actually go into the vast majority of people are just following the leader, the lead lamb or the lead. And I'm not as an insult, not say everyone's sheep, but generally we human beings, there's a pack mentality. So society works as a pack mentality. So whatever the leader's doing, like in Canada, just as an example, when Harper was in power, people started becoming very hostile towards Muslims. Trudeau comes into power, everyone becomes really nice again to Muslims. So that's the thing, is that people just follow whatever. So when it comes to atheism, currently the leaders in intellectualism right now are the scientists and the people who are making all the technology. You see Elon Musk, who's an atheist, and you find Steve Jobs, who's an atheist, and you find the majority of these guys who are generally atheists. Stephen Hawking is obviously the one who just died. And so that's the thing, is that you find that people, they want to follow whoever they respect the most, not because they actually have thought about it very deeply. So that's why when you have a very strong, very respectable Islamic leadership that is solving problems, like, for example, if you have an Islamic leadership that goes and takes all of Africa out into middle class, actually solves the poverty in Africa, actually restores the ownership of people's wealth, in terms of the ownership of public property, such as salt mines and waterways and hydropower, electricity, all this stuff becomes public property. You have somebody who's in that kind of position, and especially somebody who, when you look at the ruler, you don't see Trump, you don't see El-Sisi, you don't see Mohammed bin Salman, you don't see these losers who actually, I wouldn't even allow them to run a little Islamic school, much less like Mohammed bin Salman or any of these people. I wouldn't allow them to run any even small organization, much less run a country that dominates the world. And so the thing is that when you have really great, not just Muslims who have strong iman, but a very deep and clear understanding of human psychology and politics and economics and so on, the world's going to start looking at them for answers. So when they say, when people see that Muslims are dominating the world in science and technology, and it's not about that, to be completely honest, even without going on too far of a side point, but we tend to think that the Khilafah is, or when Islam returns to the position of ruling, that suddenly will be will become the most advanced nation in science and technology, and that's kind of not true, because Islam does not teach us to just focus on making more phones and making more computers, and rather Islam teaches us on the quality of life. We don't need the vast majority of what we have. And not only that, to be honest, I think technology will jump ahead very quickly, because a lot of the technology that's produced is produced at a graduated pace in order to make as much money as possible. So an Islamic rule will actually look at making the very best as quickly as possible, even if it's not profitable in the long term. Again, there's a whole other topic of
I think we are planning to do something on this particular topic as well, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, because that's something of the whole planned obsolescence with the light bulb and all those sorts of things.
Brother Thierry, do you want to add into that, inshallah?
Yeah, I can't really comment too much on Khilafah and everything as the Shia. That's of course a totally different subject. What I do want to say about this actually is, when we look at some of the more important thinkers of the past 200 years, we see, I just want to mention Marx and Heidegger. Marx and Heidegger were both eschatologists, in the sense that they both believed that the world is coming to a certain breaking point. With Marx, it was of course that capitalism would eventually consume itself. Heidegger said eventually we would reach the Ereignis with the new beginning. But both actually did say that both were afraid. Marx was afraid that what he called the formal dominance of capital would become the real dominance of capital, as you can see with the consumerist society, while Heidegger said that the total mechanical world that was coming up in his time, in the 50s, it was when he died, that this mechanical world would eventually make us totally forget the very question of what are we, or what is being. And when we lose this question, then we lose the need for an answer. Now, having said that, when Heidegger was on his deathbed, And there are many stories about Marx on his deathbed, but about Heidegger on his deathbed, it's been posted in a post-mortem interview, and that makes it interesting because he's a philosopher where we know what his final words were actually on this. He's in a post-mortem interview in Der Spiegel, he said, he concluded with, only a God can save us now. That was his final conclusion, even after being very much against established religion. He did end looking at the world where it was going with only a God can save us now. About that, the thing I would like to say is actually from our perspective, not so much from the perspective of state building. People assume evolution. People are assuming evolution today. That's something very modern from the last 200 years. And modern philosophy and modern thinking always assumes that there's an evolutionary process the world keeps going through, and that man is going to some end point. While such idea never existed before, and also in Islam, this idea never existed, that time has to be linear, or that what we are experiencing in the world has to be linear. The world is what it is. And this whole idea of evolution, by going, doesn't mean that we will reach a point. We are going, but it doesn't mean that we are reaching an end point. That's going up, that's going down. It can go up, it can go down. And that's why someone like Julius Evola, now I'm really starting to quote, he liked to say that we are not experiencing evolution, as was just being said about morality, and that atheists don't consider themselves very modern. He said we are actually experiencing involution, which is something to consider and to separate between the whole thing of biological evolution. Does not mean that we are socially also evolving towards something better. We are evolving, we are being caught into a real dominance of capital, and we are losing the ability to ask questions. This will reach an end point, and this point will be the point where we this point, where will it come from? Does it have to be political? No. Does it have to be philosophical or metaphysical? No, but we will reach it. The question is, can we somehow move it, or can we somehow use it, or what can we expect then? And will our validity still stay? Will the validity of Islam still stay at that point? And that's, of course, something that people should wonder. Will whatever happen in the future debunk religion further, or debunk Islam further, or will it actually increase its validity the way the world is going now? I'm making people ask a lot of questions. Sorry for that.
No, thank you very much. I think we kind of come towards the end of the show. So inshallah, Mazin, if you want to add any last final points, and then I'll pass on to Brother Thierry, inshallah.
Sure. Actually, I just wanted to comment on atheism, on evolution. That and I know this is a bit of an unpopular opinion, but to be honest, I completely reject the concept of evolution altogether. I think that there is adaptation over time and things like this, but in terms of evolution, especially the evolution where we actually change as a species, and especially change into a different species, we might have, slightly thicker skin over time. But even then, because one of the problems is that you find that a lot of the changes that happen from offspring, I've never seen any evidence that it's always for the better, or always for a stronger, or anything. And not all the traits that get passed on are survival traits. People always focus on that. It's the stronger lion, the stronger genetics will survive. And so that's not true. Often the weaker genetics survive. That's what the whole thing about us evolving, devolving. I think that I think it's mostly nonsense, because the thing is that Allah Azza wa Jalla created us, and He's the one who's managing how we change. I mean, if you think about, have we changed as a species since Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Have we changed as a species since Adam Alayhi Salam? It's the same thing. We have a desire to procreate. We have a desire to survive. We have a desire to sanctify something. These are the general three motivators that push us in life. And so, because the danger in evolution, in believing in evolution, is that people will start thinking that the laws change over time. And Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed the laws for human beings as human beings, and human beings don't change as human beings. The only thing that's changed is just the materials that we use in order to do the exact same thing that we used to do. which is again to procreate, have families, and love and feel loved. That's one. And then you have the survive, which is to build things and have businesses and to be clean and to be healthy and so on and so forth. That's two. And then to sanctify something, whether it's idols or humans or stars or the creator of the universe. But anyways, that's a whole other topic, and I realize that a lot of people get really upset, and I even find a lot of Muslims get really offended. How can you not believe in them? You make us look all silly. And the reality is that I think that it as a theory is just a theory. I honestly believe that they came up with this theory, or they really latched onto it in order to get away from the oppression of the church during the Dark Ages. And in Russia, the Tsar is moving their own direction towards socialism. You did mention actually socialism earlier on, which was an interesting thing, which is talking about how socialism says that God doesn't exist and so on. It's actually that is one of the most, that is a truly evolutionist ideology, because they actually believe matter is eternal, and it's all matter is just simply like matter, like man, nature, and man's relationship with nature are simply one thing. And so it's just the evolution of matter throughout all of history. So God never existed. There's no such thing as a creator, and so everything is just matter. That's why they look at religion as an opiate, because it releases chemicals that shouldn't be released, because it makes you lethargic and lazy, and it's so it's the opiate of the masses. Bottom line is, I think that when it comes down to the issue of atheism, is that we really just have to recognize the age that we're living in, which is an age of that has established belief, that has established the concept that what you believe in as a religion means nothing, because it's a secular system. As long as you're living according to the laws of the land, which are not from God, because God has no right to tell us what to do according to secularism, your personal religious stuff means nothing to society. You can pray, you cannot pray. Nobody cares. You can wear a headscarf, you don't wear a headscarf. Nobody cares, although some people have crossed those bounds. You can build a mosque, not build a mosque. Same thing, kind of some people cross those bounds. But generally, at least in theory, nobody cares what you believe in as long as you don't affect anybody. So that's what it says, that you can become Muslim and reject Islam. That's why they get so upset when you talk about the law, the hukm of apostasy, which is execution. But it has to be in a certain environment, of course, under an Islamic state where people's rights are given and Islam is very clear, and then you leave Islam where, at that point in time where it's very clear, then there's the issue. Not only that, but even the whole had of apostasy has to be done by this on a state authority. So the ruler, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, basically has to have appointed Qadi al-Qudat, who appoints the Qudat, and then you have the whole what's called istitaba. You're given a period of, let's say, 1 to 3 days to have discussions, to really think carefully. Because the point is, what Islam does is it says that this is such an important decision, and one that's well known globally, that you don't become Muslim unless you've thought about it carefully, because you can't leave. What it does is establishes this premise, because people always defend it. Oh no, it was never applied, and the reality is that no, it is a hukum, and so it's because what it does is it makes you realize that belief and not believing in something is a really serious topic. So you have to take it seriously, because it's Jannah and Jahannam. So what it does is you might not like it in the dunya, but on Yawm al-Qiyamah, you'll be very, very happy that there's something holding you in Islam. Because if you're thinking, well, I don't know if I want this anymore, you stick to it, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, you end up going to Jannah, you say, well, alhamdulillah, who really cares what happened back in the dunya? That's the whole point. So we're living in a world that, because secularism is so dominant, belief means nothing, and therefore people look at belief as if either it's insignificant, or because of the whole Santa syndrome, which is you end up feeling like you're like a stupid kid for believing in something that you can't see, despite the fact that there's very obvious proof, which I guess we're discussing maybe in the next show, and I'm not 100% sure about when it's going to happen. But and then you have the whole scientists. So many scientists are atheists, and the thing is that I've discussed with many professors and all these intellectuals, and it's always the same thing. When you really push them to the wall, not people who are career atheists. So when you're talking about those guys, they'll never admit, because they're making millions off of kufr. But when you talk just to the average professor, for example, my biology professor back in Calgary, at the university, I think this was in, I'm not wrong, it was in college at the time. I remember I got into discussion with him, and he's an atheist, and then he actually said, you know what? After we discussed, he said, I guess really the bottom line is I can't really see evolution taking place without some sort of divine intervention. They realize that there's no way that this human and these animals and this setup is just completely random. They know that, but they're actually just kind of following their own clergy, the same as the Christians are following their own clergy blindly. And the vast majority of people, there's even videos online where they question people. Are you an atheist? They say yes, I'm an atheist. And then they ask them, or do you believe in evolution? And then most people have not ever looked into any of the evidence to prove it. They just follow blindly. And then they talk about people who are religious who are blind and they all follow their beliefs blindly. That's the bottom line, is you have to kind of take a step back. And so for those of us who believe, recognize that your belief is actually founded in proofs. You have to know your proofs. And when you're approaching other people, you have to understand that, you know, they're in an environment that kind of pushes them to make them feel better about themselves when they're atheists, because they're made to feel as if belief is something for juvenile or idiots. I mean, one last quick point. Look at The Simpsons, right? Look at every single show or cartoon where you have the religious, you know, the clergy. They're always blind. Like, for example, you look at Ned Flanders and his wife and his kids. They always make the religious person look like they're naive. And it doesn't matter, even if they kind of give Ned Flanders some respect once in a while, you know, he's a strong guy or whatever else might be. But the bottom line is that they make him look like an idiot. And there's so many shows that basically you have, you know, the religious person in the little group, they're always naive and dumb and they don't think, and because they're always associating that with Christianity. Islam is a very, very intellectual religion. And when Christianity ruled, you had the Dark Ages. When Islam ruled, you had the golden age of science and technology in the world, up until the Khilafah fell, and then the Muslims went into our own dark age just because we abandoned the laws of our deen. So I guess that's essentially the gist of it, that if we start from this kind of foundation, we can approach belief from the Islamic perspective, which is very different than all other perspectives, which is a very rational foundation that forbids us from believing in anything unless we've proven it 100%.
Well, thank you very much for that. Brother Cherry, did you want to conclude the final note?
Maybe some
without going into a debate about evolution.
No, I won't go in. Don't worry. Just some fun closing remarks, maybe to ponder upon. Rousseau, in Émile ou l'Éducation, he said that you cannot recognize someone as both citizen and human. So that's something to ponder upon. He saw a clear distinction between a citizen and a man or a person. And about evolution, something interesting maybe to consider also. From the past 200 years, we have kind of forgotten the magic in the world. This is something that is also, which can be debated, but I mean, there's a scientism and there's a historicism, everything in linear history, everything seen through the eyes of science, through the eyes of rationalism, which is also a limit on our understanding of things. There is a kind of supra-rationalism, which is why I like to say actually that evolution, sure, it finds place, but is the earth on top of a whale, who is on top of a rock, who is on top of the horn of a bull? Yes, also. But this is another world, which we are also at the same time living in. And usually that at least gets the conversation going, and I would like to have these conversations some other time, but otherwise we'll be here until the morning.
No problem, brother. Thank you very much. Again, guys, thank you very much for joining today's discussion. You know, mashallah, you guys you know, shared quite a bit of information there. I hope the viewers benefited from that. Inshallah, we'll do something like this again in the future, perhaps another topic related to issues that affects us as Muslims in this day and age, as a society as a whole. So yeah, I'm going to inshallah end this broadcast now. Jazakallah khair. Wa alaikum salam.